Welcome back. Recent statistics from market research company GfK highlighting that South Africa's gaming market is a 1.72 billion rand industry. In a recent edition of Finweek, reporter Kristia van Heerden covered the spending potential of South African gamers. A few weeks later, the Finweek Money Matters discussion around the article sparked a heated debate about women in gaming in South Africa that taken to Twitter. So today we're taking a look at the South African women in gaming industry, and we're taking a look at the potential there and the spending potential. In studio with us, Jessica Hubbard, journalist at Finweek, Pippa Tshabalala, video game journalist, and Hanli Geyser, the video game design lecturer at Wits University. Thank you for joining us. So Mark, you're outnumbered because it's Women's Month, but not just because of that, but because this is a growing market here in South Africa and worth some attention.
Sure. Okay, just up front, I'm just saying it. Jess said it, not me. No, I mean, I think one of the things...
What did Jess say? Let's just put that out there because everyone out there is clueless.
Cool. I think so. Basically, what we did, we looked at the gaming industry, and at the time, we actually had two gentlemen on the panel. And what we ultimately said, we may have promulgated some stereotypes out there about women in gaming. So what we did, we threw it out onto Twitter, and we started to get quite a heated debate going in terms of what is this, are we stereotyping women? What is their role within video gaming, digital animation? And we maybe take a few words back and say, hey, the industry is changing. This is a market we should be aware of. And, times are changing, and maybe we need to be aware of what's happening out there.
Yeah, okay. So let's take a look at the developments when it comes to how the industry is changing. I mean, we talk about, size of it in monetary terms, but how has the industry changed, say, in the last while that you've been covering it?
Look, I mean, I think, definitely there is a much more equal split between men and women, which is part of the reason that I was saying that, like, those statistics that you're putting out there are just simply not true. Well, I shouldn't say statistics, I should say, suppositions. That just simply aren't true. I mean, if you're looking at like the sort of the latest ESA stats, Electronic Software Association, granted that's a very American slant, and I'm aware of that, but that is an almost 50-50 split. I think it's something like 47% of gamers, particularly online gamers, are women, and which means that the spending potential in each household is again that much more. And you'll find that even if you don't have women playing the games, you've got a large amount of women spending money on games because they're buying for other members of their household.
Just to jump in with a question, do we know what type of games women are playing?
It is very much a cross-section. I mean, RPGs are very high on that list, and yes, I mean, you do find like social networking games.
RPGs being?
Role-playing games.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, there's more and more roles that are actually, in fact, women. Just doing some research, not being a video gamer myself, unfortunately, but more and more roles are being played by women, and more video games are being played with women at the kind of center of the video game.
Definitely. I mean, sort of looking at protagonists like Lara Croft, for example, and although there are some issues with that because she is sort of quite hyper masculinized, but it's the idea that as a strong female protagonist as opposed to the damsel in distress, which is very often...
How are you designing video games right now? Do you have male versus female target market in mind, or is that gender is not an issue in this world?
Gender is always an issue, but no, that is not how you determine your target demographic unless you're trying to achieve something very specific. In terms of design of video games in South Africa and production of video games in South Africa, I'm on the committee of Make Games SA, which is an NGO representing a couple of hundred South African game developers, where women are horrifically outnumbered. We make up only about 10% of the group. So there is very much imbalance there, and part of the challenge is to recognize that there is a power imbalance in terms of production as well as consumption within the gaming medium, but to be aware of how that is propagated through assumptions like casual games. And you ask the question, what kind of games are women playing? In South Africa, we have almost no statistics. The closest we have is really great work produced by Marion Walton and Nicola Pallet at UCT, where they've been working mostly with children. So to determine adult games and what kind of adult games you're playing when you're interviewing 13-year-olds is highly problematic. Within the kids that are part of their research, they have found that there is a very clear gender split in the kind of games that are played. Mm-hmm. Girls tend to be attracted to more social games, as well as for the very little girls, sort of ages 7 to 10, SingStar, games with pets, the games that we would associate with children. But you get the same problem there as you do walking down any clothing aisle.
I've had a lot of fun on SingStar in my time.
But I have a question though. How did you get into what you do? I mean, I've kind of followed Pippa's career since, from high school through to where she is now, and I kind of have an idea of how that's evolved. But how did you get into the industry you're in? Because, I mean, as you clearly said, it's a South Africa, it is largely a male-dominated industry. How did you get to where you are in a 30-second version?
30-second version.
Go for it.
I'm an academic. I lecture. I am passionate about games. I always have been. And the academic path was what interested me. The natural step was for me to move into researching games and from there teaching games and game development.
I just want to interject. I mean, Hanli and I have known each other since first year varsity. So for us, I mean, that's always sort of been a common interest. And, we also share common interests like things like comic books. So, I mean, those kinds of things very often align.
Just to get back to the business side of it, I mean, how large a market do you think female gamers in South Africa present? Is it something that developers and coders and the producers of these games need to be paying attention to attract more females to the market, or is it growing by itself?
It's growing by itself. The biggest problem with ideas of attracting more to the market through targeted game development is that you end with situations where you slap it in pink. And
what's the term? Pink it and shrink it.
Pink it and shrink it.
I like that.
And that's not appropriate. To attract women into technology is not about making it pink. It is about allowing an equal footing from an early stage. If you go and walk down aisles in a toy store, and you get to the boys section where you have a robot that does 20 things, is programmable, reconfigurable in 8 different ways. On the girls' aisle, for the same age group, you'll have a doll. You're not encouraging the same level of access to technology, entry to technology from an early age. So then to be surprised when the stats for the same age group says the one prefers playing with SingStar, and the other one prefers playing with racing cars, can't be surprising because that is the way the children are being taught. However, when you get to an older demographic, for my course, we are horribly oversubscribed, but of all the applicants, hundreds of applicants, 40% are women.
And you're oversubscribed, so there's a big interest in getting into this as a career.
Huge.
In South Africa.
Huge.
It's a growing market right now. So how much is being developed locally in South Africa? I mean, who the big developers, who the big funders of the video game industry?
Well, I think the important thing to realize about the local industry is that we're primarily an indie development industry. So we don't have big AAA studios like you find, in the States or in Europe or anything like that. But we have some very prominent indie studios.
Yes.
There's
Currently,
QCF Design.
QCF, Free Lives are probably our 2 best known.
Yeah.
As well as in your previous segment, you had Travis Bulford here from Celestial. Celestial is also quite a large company. Currently in South Africa, there are 23 companies who are making a living doing nothing but building creative games. This is not including people who are building for other industries, so education, advertising. Those are your targeted games where people will approach you and say, we need a game that teaches math to 4th grade girls.
And in your experience, when you have female game designers or coders, do you see the content of the games coming out being vastly different in nature and in tone? No.
Not at all.
What about the role of role models in South Africa? Because we don't. I mean, I was just sitting here trying to work. I can't think of a single woman in technology who has a genuine high profile. And I'm talking broad tech. I mean, there are a couple of agency people and that kind of thing that might jump out. But I'd really battle to find a role model in the tech industry that would spring front to mind. I mean, who's out there that we should be?
There's very prominent people in places in like Microsoft, for example. And her name escapes me at the moment. Tall, blonde, pretty woman, but and she's had very high profile across companies like IBM and Microsoft, and a couple others. And I mean, she's not the only one. I mean,
you may be interested in the Wired Woman conference,
definitely.
Which is an entire conference dedicated to women in technology, which is attracting and hoping to encourage exactly that. Female tech role models.
I mean, just being Women's Month right now and being a time where you, I suppose, ask questions like this, because there are so many conferences that are specifically targeted at women, and as you say, that creates more interest. But do you have to have a specific, conference called Wide Women? Why can't it just be wide? Why do you need to have that target market to engender more interest in the sector?
I wish that could be the case. And in an ideal world, that would be the case. And it's the same argument that is brought up when minority groups of various kinds have conferences dedicated to that group. Conferences of that nature are, however, necessary because until such time as it is more accepted, it is easier in the mainstream, and discrimination against women, other racial groups, other genders and sexual orientations begins to lift. Those voices aren't going to be heard unless they make themselves heard in conferences like this.
Yeah, and just to end off, do you think that men are being more accepting of women working side by side them in this profession?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, which is perhaps why I didn't take offense, but it was more like it's frustrating when you sort of hear stereotypes like this when actually that's not the case. I mean, very often people are far more accepting of it than we realize. But the problem is that as soon as things like that happen, you get the inevitable get back in the kitchen comment, which, yeah.
And just to end off with you on that point?
Yes and no. Between the developers themselves, they are extremely open and nurturing towards bringing more people into the industry, but a quick glance over consumer magazines on the internet will tell you that as long as breasts are the main focus, things are going to struggle to change.